just fascinating to see how different worldviews are built up through different sources of information. Also, you have to understand that, again, in a small country with limited resources, you have to think of all of the foreign sources of information that are coming to us and presenting themselves as part of our agenda or our interests, and trying to extricate yourself from the kind of the mud of somebody else's ideas and interests, and then thinking from your perspective.
Teamwork Arts Podcast, ladies and gentlemen. This is where we go behind the thoughts of those who make the art, the thoughts that animate the actions of those who create the arts. And diplomacy is considered an art, at least till now, and as is authorship. And both of them have words in common and their judicious use as well. So we thought we'd find out exactly how that is done with diplomat and author Omar Ghobash. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
One of your professions, or maybe the primary profession, can we call it, or that of a diplomat?
Yes.
It exercises
my day job.
It's your day job. Must exercise constraint and fact-based information, and what you do in the evening, putting pen to paper, is a little more creative. Those two worlds separate for you, or they merge sometimes?
Wow. In a world of disinformation, actually, there's a lot of overlap between the world of writing and diplomacy. I say that kind of in jest, but there's almost a lot of truth to it. You're always trying to build up a narrative.
Yeah.
And you spend time every day trying to understand the world around you. There is understanding the world that you work in, and then there's understanding the world that you retire into afterwards. And they're both kind of occasions where you have to make choices. And so how do you make those choices about how you build the world around you? I'll be honest, it's not easy. And so if I find that it's not easy for myself, I'm assuming it's not easy for people out there. Of course, what's happening in Europe at the moment is just another example of how we build narratives around crucial events.
For sure.
And also how helpless we can feel on the outside, not being able to fully understand.
Sure.
Making a commitment to a certain kind of reading, and then discovering through conversations with other people that there is an entirely different aspect that can turn your reading upside down. So.
It's also a time when information is increasingly masquerading as knowledge, because information is passive, and now it seems to be everywhere. Knowledge is a more active pursuit where you actually bring in information and then collate it into knowledge. And a lot of information is now being passed off as knowledge. Do you think that's a bit of a threat to the world we live in?
I think it is, because again, who are the authorities that decide what is knowledge and what isn't?
Yeah.
Who is selecting that knowledge to be presented? These are difficult issues, including in government. But even at the level of daily work, I find myself pulling back into a place where the only thing that I can really do is look at the things that I can control and the things that I can verify with my own sort of sources. But I've been proved incorrect on more than one occasion. So it just shows how fragile actually the world around us is, and at what level that you're looking at kind of narratives around you. And some of the narratives are very focused on sort of social situations or family situations or specific instances, and then there are the more geopolitical, strategic level approaches. And how do you decide which one is the most appropriate one? And what are the long-term consequences of favoring one level of analysis over another?
Right. These are also things that are based on ideas, I would assume. And ideas are some things that, again, for your day job and for your writing, are important. Would you agree that ideas have increasingly been weaponized to serve certain agendas, and that information is now beginning to fit into those ideas rather than it flowing free and ideas being discussed more freely? Do you think it's becoming a shrinking world, for example?
Shrinking and polarized. And less nuanced and less sophisticated and less interested, I think. And I mean, potentially, in a way, many of those kind of sophistications are less relevant because decisions are being made on the basis of simplified, reduced views of the world. So yeah.
I think, and that's the thing. I think debate is a bit of a sacrifice that's been made at the altar of ideas. In that way, the nuance is lost a little, isn't it?
But there's also sometimes I get the feeling that the debate is just a form of pleasure, and actually the decision that is made at the end is made by a completely different set of people, operating different levers that have actually nothing to do with the public debate or the political debate.
Sure.
So I think that's something that's appeared in Western political theory. There is a danger that you have a talking shop and then you have the smoky background.
In fact, and that's a very interesting point because, increasingly, would you agree that we're becoming increasingly a world of the ors rather than the ands? You have to be this or that. You can't be this and that,
Absolutely.
Which was probably a little critical to the debate because then you were listening, which is going to be my next question. But what do you think about the ors and the ands?
Well, that's interesting, particularly for a small country like the United Arab Emirates. The wanting to maintain relations with a number of large players in what is at times a unipolar world and sometimes multipolar world.
Absolutely.
Not knowing exactly how you're going to be treated by a new political party or a new president or a new prime minister in essentially from the West, who actually hold an immense amount of transnational power. And just try to understand the possibility for small countries to be, rather than partisans, to be mediators, a place where we can assist other parties to actually come to terms with each other. So I think again, I'm always in my mind is the Ukraine and Russia, and now watching Turkey try to offer its good offices, or Israel, for example. And the idea that there needs to be a space where you can be yourself and not make a commitment and not take a side in order to create an opportunity for those who have taken sides to exit this situation.
There's also this, increasingly a feeling that someone put it very beautifully, and it stayed with me, that we're also becoming a time when we're not listening, we're waiting. Nobody seems to be willing to listen anymore. They're just waiting to set it out. Do you think that's a valid?
Yeah, I think not listening is a kind of arrogance, that there is nothing to listen to, that the other side doesn't have any legitimate interests or legitimate positions, that the non-listening side has already won all of the arguments. And even if they haven't, well, they still have the high moral ground because they're continually defining the world from that perspective. And I think it's a function of the traditional power that some of those groups hold, that it allows them to be indifferent to other voices. And also, of course, again, coming from a small country, we hear many other voices. Sure. And we're always looking to hear other voices. And I think that's important.
Your day job as a diplomat and your passion as a writer, does one telescope into the other at some point in time, considering that there would be things that you'd want to, I mean, is there any seepage between the two?
Well, I published one book around Islam at a time when ISIS was at its height.
Sure.
And I actually found myself being more diplomatic in that book than I was in my day job. And the reason is because I wanted to see the way in which a contemporary text could communicate with people who traditionally wouldn't have listened to me.
Sure.
Because I'm not a scholar of Islam, I don't claim any kind of credentials there, no religious authority, but as a human being having a perspective and wanting to have that perspective picked up by people with very long beards and very in certain cases very narrow minds.
Sure.
Important to speak to them, important to actually communicate with them, because they still have a certain authority.
We were speaking to William Dalrymple a while back, and he said something very interesting. He said that even if you're writing about history, our present time has a lot to do with the way that you're writing this history. And you've written about Islam. Did the contemporary scenario color the way that you described what you were writing?
I think absolutely. I mean, because I can't extricate myself from the social situation I'm living in.
Sure.
The cultural situation I'm living in. And sort of having access to historical material that sort of presents Islam, as a golden period here or a sort of glorious period there. All of that's fine, but it doesn't touch on my life today as a Muslim. I see the Islam that is operating today in many different ways, and as a function of political, economic, financial forces as well.
We were talking about information earlier. What is your process as a writer? I'm assuming, of course, that as a diplomat, you know how to process information that's coming to you.
Big assumption. Yeah. Very good.
We have a rosy picture, so it's always nice to keep in these strange and bizarre times. But does the way that you treat information as a diplomat have any way in the way you treat information while you're writing as an author?
Well, I will say that one of the questions I ask significant figures in the political and diplomatic field is I do ask them, what sources of information do you use?
Right.
How do you judge them? Who do you speak to? And quite often I then find out that, they will go to traditional Western sources. Or they will, they'll have access to national intelligence sources or people on the ground. And it's just fascinating to see how different worldviews are built up through different sources of information. Also, you have to understand that, again, in a small country with limited resources, you have to think of all of the foreign sources of information that are coming to us and presenting themselves as part of our agenda or our interests, and trying to extricate yourself from the kind of the mud of somebody else's ideas and interests, and then thinking from your perspective. That's not an easy thing. That's working with other diplomats, working with government members, becoming self-aware and self-conscious of all of the influences on you. Now, when it comes to writing, I'm in the process of completing a novel, and it feels like I've been in the process of completing it for about a year now. And But the sources of information, they're all around me, because I'm just observing life in the Emirates, and it's that observation that is kind of informing the passages that I write. And so it's just becoming hyper aware of specific instances, whether it's prayer or reciting verses of, in worship, or, looking at some of the plants and trees that we have in the Emirates and digging into the significance that they have for me or for, the main character. But I mean, the source of information are right there. I just want to be hyper aware of where I'm living.
Does it also sometimes feel like compromise one or the other while you're doing one or the other job?
No, not really, actually. I actually think it's great to be able to exit one and enter the other. And I'm becoming increasingly familiar with the idea of using certain mechanisms as portals into a different sense of consciousness, to be able to enter the novel means, and that's part of the reason why I'm not finishing it, is because it's a home for me. It's a way out of, it's an imaginative way out of wherever I am. And perhaps the way I finish it is by thinking what I should do next.
Sure. Yeah. Writing has become a little glamorous, what with the internet coming in, etc. And
with the JLF, you mean?
Yeah, also. but yeah, they're increasingly becoming faces. So there are lots of people who get seduced by the glamour of writing. Yeah. And there's always a flip side to the coin, which includes the grind that comes with the writing, the hard work that comes with writing. Somebody with a stressful job who has a book inside of them, which I'm assuming you had as well, which is what made you write. What is the advice that you'd give to someone like that?
I would just say that, I mean, in my case, I wrote one book which was around Islam, and the second book which was around, particularly a historical event. Both of them are situations where I need to actually write. And it's a painful process. Part of, again, the reason why it's taken so long is that I have to face certain things in a way that, becomes worthy of publishing, but at the same time is actually very, very painful. Sure. I think the pain of not doing it is greater than the pain of actually producing it. So that's important. Always recognize that, in creation, you're offering up something to the world. And through the pain that you've gone, you may be contributing to somebody else's peace.
Yeah, in your pain, you might be contributing to someone else's peace. Wise words from someone who has gained that wisdom with experience. So thank you very much for that, Mr. Omar Ghobash. That's thinking, it's important. And if what he said made you think, that's a good step. Don't shy away from it. Thank you very much for your time, sir. It's been absolutely wonderful. This is the Teamwork Arts Podcast. If you've got anything to say, you know what to do, right? Like, subscribe, comment. Validation is what we live for, so why not? But we hope you enjoyed it. And more importantly, we hope there's that little spark that makes you think a little, because thinking should not be a luxury. It should ideally be a necessity. Thank you very much for listening. This is the Teamwork Arts Podcast.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, subscribe to our channel now. We have a new episode out every Friday.